On this episode of DBL's True Crime Chronicles, a young woman's disappearance is tied to a campus security officer's sudden crime spree. And later, the wife of a small-town police officer is found dead, only to come back to life and implicate him.
Welcome to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. I'm Sam Shocker. For many, security officers provide a sense of protection and reassurance on par with law enforcement, but not for Kaylee Sawyer or anyone else who came into contact with Edwin Lara over several terrifying days in 2016.
It was July 23, 2016. That was the night 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer ventured out for a night of fun in Bend, Oregon. Kaylee was born and raised in Bend, the product of a large, loving family.
She was the first grandchild. She had such a big, happy personality, always smiling.
Kaylee worked as a dental assistant while studying at Central Oregon Community College to become a dentist. But on the night in question, Kaylee put her studies behind her to attend a friend's bachelorette party. After texting her boyfriend to pick her up, they returned home to the apartment they shared on campus. The two got into an argument, and she left. Kaylee never returned. When she didn't show up for work the next day, Kaylee's boyfriend reported her missing to police.
Last night I got home from the bars with my girlfriend. She got upset at me and ran off.
The following day, Monday the 25th, at around noon, Isabel Ponce Lara, a new Bend police officer, went to the Redmond Police Department. She made a report that her husband, Edwin Lara, confessed to killing a woman.
I've covered countless cases about missing people, kidnappings, and murders, but Kaylee's story is one that still haunts me.
Edwin Lara was a security guard at Central Oregon Community College. Isabel reported to authorities that her husband had been acting strangely the morning after Kaylee's disappearance. She assumed it was because of marriage troubles that the couple had been having. But the following morning, she learned from Edwin himself the horrible truth. He told his wife that he had accidentally struck and killed a woman with his work security vehicle in the early hours of the previous day, and that the woman's belongings were in their shed. After police had arrived to search Edwin and Isabel's home, they found evidence that suggested Edwin hadn't accidentally hit the woman with his vehicle. Inside the Lara family shed, investigators found Kaylee's purse and her high-heeled shoes thrown away in a white bag. They found a clump of Kaylee's blonde hair and bloodstains on Edwin's work boots. Police even found one of Edwin's school projects he had kept on serial killer Angel Ramirez. They also discovered a blood-stained rock. But before authorities could arrest Edwin, the suspected killer had already fled. Edwin had left the house before police had started searching his home, before Isabel had even gone to police to report the homicide. Edwin had taken Isabel's 9mm handgun and drove off in his Nissan Altima, embarking on a multi-state crime spree. Edwin first drove to his parents' house, where he swapped his car with his parents' Subaru Legacy. Police recovered Edwin's Nissan later that day, having found a significant amount of dried blood and blonde hair in the trunk. Edwin then drove 130 miles west to Salem, Oregon. Abandoning his car, he forced his way into the vehicle of a 19-year-old woman, Andrea Elizabeth Mays, and kidnapped her. Edwin forced the 19-year-old at gunpoint to drive nearly 300 miles south, crossing state lines into California, where the car broke down in a small town called Wairika, where Edwin abandoned her car but kept Andrea with him. Wandering the town with a gun in his hand and still holding Andrea captive, Edwin walked to a motel parking lot. He attempted to steal another vehicle from a man leaning on his car in the lot. However, instead of fleeing with the vehicle, the encounter ended with Edwin shooting the man in the stomach with Isabel's handgun, leaving the man bleeding in the lot. Edwin ran, dragging Andrea with him, to a nearby gas station, where he carjacked another vehicle that had a woman and her 2 grandsons still inside. With the family and Andrea in the car, Edwin confessed to them that he had murdered Kaylee. Edwin also told them that since he was young, he had always felt an urge to kill. Edwin pulled the car over shortly after and let the family go, but he kept Andrea captive. He forced her to record him with her phone, where he confessed all of his crimes. Edwin then demanded Andrea post the video to her Facebook page. Having joined the freeway bound for Redding, California, Edwin dialed 911. He confessed to Kaylee's murder and his interstate crime spree again, this time to the 911 operator. He was pulled over a short time later. Edwin urged police not to shoot him. They arrested him on the spot. At the police station, Edwin told authorities he was working his shift as a public safety officer when he saw Kaylee walking by herself on campus grounds. He pulled over in his official vehicle. Kaylee may have thought he was going to help her because she got in the back, but instead, Edwin attacked and raped Kaylee. He then used a rock to kill Kaylee before disposing of her body in a canyon off the highway. After the confession, police found Kaylee's body off of West Highway 126 in Oregon. An autopsy revealed the cause of death to be blunt force trauma, with evidence of strangulation, multiple skull fractures, sexual assault, and other signs of injury prior to her death.
In his confession, Edwin Lara repeated the phrase that haunted his captives, saying that throughout his life he struggled with the urge to kill, but that his marriage helped him not act on it. We'll be right back with the fate of Edwin Lara. After a 2-day crime spree that began with the rape and murder of Kaylee Sawyer and ended with the kidnapping of a family, Edwin Lara was in custody. But what kind of punishment would he face?
Edwin Lara was initially indicted on 4 counts of aggravated murder in Kaylee's abduction, rape, and killing. In January of 2018, to avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 1 count each of aggravated murder and robbery. Despite his initial confession, once in court, he refused to admit to sexually assaulting Kaylee. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Edwin Enoch Lara is now incarcerated at the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution in Pendleton, Oregon. But the story doesn't end there, as a reporter and host of a podcast about Edwin Lara reveals.
We're joined by reporter and host of the Urge to Kill podcast, Ashley Corsland from our sister station KGW in Portland. Now, Ashley, you mentioned Kaylee's story still haunts you. I mean, you think about all the bachelorette parties that we've all been to. It seems like it could happen to any one of us. What made you want to produce an entire podcast on this?
I think there was just something about her story. There was so much that I wanted to learn and so much that really wasn't covered in the news. Part of our purpose here is really to tell people about Kaylee and who she was, this beautiful young woman taken too soon. Another thing is that people to this day still think her death was an accident, and that's because some of the early information that was put out based on what her killer had told his wife and police at the time, which was not true, but that information got out through the media, and so to this day people don't know that she was killed intentionally. Another reason we focused on this case was because her killer had other victims across several states, and we really haven't heard from some of them before. So this is the first time that several of them are sharing their story, and it's really powerful.
Ashley, Edwin Lara pled guilty. He is serving a life sentence. Now, his only explanation was that he had, quote, an urge to kill. I watch a lot of true crime and I listen to a lot of podcasts. I gotta ask, did police ever find another motive? And have you ever seen this motive as just the urge to kill in any other case?
I've never heard that. That was one of the most startling things about this case that really compelled us to look into it. You know, he had told police in this 6-hour interrogation after his arrest, he gave him several stories, right? So he said it was an accident, I hit her with the car. Then he moved on to saying that he assumed she was a prostitute and that all he tried to do was rob her. So he went through several stories before police got it out of him, and he said, I've had an urge to kill for as long as I can remember. And something, it's crazy, and something that we looked into is he actually told police he had planned a murder in the past. So they took that statement very seriously, and you know, they found a presentation on serial killers in his shed that he kept from college, because they firmly believe that he could have been or would have become a serial killer.
How has Kaylee's story changed how security and safety on college campuses is handled?
Yeah, so Al, that's kind of the bright light that came of this tragic story. Is her family went on to push for what's now known as Kaylee's Law in Oregon. And so Kaylee's Law essentially mandates steps that campus police officers or college safety guards can't look like police officers. So uniforms, equipment, cars, that sort of thing. And then it also mandates very strict national background checks and psychological tests for any of these future college safety guards. So that's really the what's come out of this. That has been a big deal for the state of Oregon.
Yeah, that's a very important protocol. Thank you so much, Ashley. The first episode is out now.
Guys.
If you want to listen, head to kgw.com. When searching Edwin Lara's home, police found a school project he had kept on serial killer Angel Resendez, who had confessed to killing his victims with whatever blunt object he found nearby, a behavior Lara would emulate with Kaylee Sawyer. More of DBL's True Crime Chronicles right after this. Welcome back to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. What happens when those who serve and protect are the ones we may need to be protected from? This is a question a young woman's family found themselves asking after her murder.
Matthew and Jessica Boynton were high school sweethearts. They met and fell in love when he was 16 and she was 15. Within 4 years, they would be married with 2 children. Matthew was a police officer in their hometown of Griffin, Georgia. Jessica was a stay-at-home mom. It was April 2016. After a night of arguing with Jessica, Matthew was off duty and about to meet a fellow officer for a bite to eat. But instead, he called in to dispatch.
You want EMS? Can you please dispatch a unit out to my location?
Matthew said his wife was home with their 2 children and she was expressing suicidal thoughts. He also made sure to say he left his service revolver at home. Matthew reached his home before the dispatched officers, but would later claim he never went inside.
I believe I just heard a shot fire coming in my residence. I just came up the stairs 2 rounds.
Stay outside. I'll be there in about 2. Stay outside.
30-15, be advised of the smoke and smoke. And I can't get an answer to the door.
Officers arrived and kept Matthew outside of the apartment while they entered. They find the children, but no sign of Jessica. Then police were faced with a locked closet door. Locked from the inside. The officers forced their way in and found Jessica on the floor inside, bleeding from the head. By now, Matthew had entered the home, but fellow officers tried to shield him from the sight of his injured wife.
Stay out, Matt. Get him downstairs. Get him downstairs.
Matthew's police-issued .40 caliber Glock revolver was discovered underneath Jessica's body. A distraught Matthew is caught on video. Jessica was pronounced dead at the scene. But that pronouncement would prove to be wrong.
They were calling me the miracle child.
Why is that?
Because what I went through, not a lot of people survived through it.
Jessica survived, barely. She was placed in a medically induced coma. When she woke up, she had no memory of that fateful night.
What are they telling you happened to you?
They're saying it was self-inflicted.
That it was an attempted suicide?
Yes.
Do you believe that?
No, I do not.
Jessica also learned that in addition to her husband's police force, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation examined the scene. The GBI found no blood splatter, which was unusual for a close-range gunshot wound. They also found 2 bullet holes on different walls inside the closet. One went through the roof, the other lodged into one of the baby's bedroom walls.
They're saying I had to have done it like this, down, but yet the bullet goes through the ceiling and the roof and out the wall.
None of them had any of Jessica's DNA on them, and no bullet fragments were recovered from her head. Even more tellingly, no entry or exit wounds were found on Jessica. It appears as if her head injury was more the result of blunt force trauma. The doctors who treated Jessica also made sure to note that both of her hands were pristine and unmarked. Jessica also learned of a text sent from Jessica's phone saying, "I can't do this anymore. This is not the first time I have had suicide thoughts. I love you and the boys."
There was no lock on my phone.
She disputes ever being in this sort of mindset, but due to the text and the presence of Jessica's DNA on the gun, the investigation is brief and Matthew is cleared of any potential wrongdoing. He returned to work only to be arrested months later, but not for the incident with his wife, from whom he was now separated.
At the time of the incident, Jessica and Matthew were experiencing serious marital problems, with Matthew having learned that their youngest child was not biologically his, and Jessica herself stumbling across text messages between Matthew and a police department dispatcher he was having an affair with. More of this story when DBL's True Crime Chronicles continues. Young love gone bad. It's an all too familiar story, and one that had almost deadly consequences for 19-year-old Jessica Boynton and her 20-year-old husband, Matthew.
Jessica Boynton had allegedly tried to kill herself using her police officer husband Matthew's service revolver. When Jessica was found in a closet that was locked from the inside, she was initially declared dead, only to then show signs of life. When Jessica awoke from a coma weeks later, she questioned the official version of events, and she and Matthew parted ways. Months later, Matthew was arrested, but not for the shooting.
Whose bag is that?
Jessica's.
And the contents in the bag?
And it's got all her stuff in it.
Jessica had filed a formal complaint, stating that Matthew stole personal items of hers while she was in a coma, only to deny taking them later. She also claimed he tore pages out of a journal she had been keeping on the dissolution of their marriage and her plans for a life after they divorced. Jessica said the pages contained information about Matthew's affair and other damaging behavior. Matthew was ultimately fired from the police department. In 2020, an investigative journalist hosted a podcast on Jessica's story.
We're joined by Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe from WXIA in Atlanta. Thank you so much for joining us. Brendan, evidence in this case is messy. So Jessica believes her husband shot her. He says she was suicidal. In 4 years of covering this, what's the piece of evidence that speaks to you about what really happened that night?
The most disturbing thing to me, Tori, is that locked closet.
Right.
It was locked from the inside. Who would actually put a lock on a closet that could only be opened and unlocked from the inside? It was one of those bathroom style locks. That still perplexes me. I don't know what happened in that closet, and because she can't remember, Jessica doesn't know either.
Now, you spoke with Jessica, and because of her injury, her head injury, she said she can't remember the events leading up to the shooting, but she's adamant that she didn't do it. What else did she tell you that you find interesting?
The last thing Jessica remembers is filling out a journal in that closet with her husband's gun in the gun belt behind her where he normally kept it. She's in the closet filling out the journal. What is she writing? what she wants in the divorce, custody and money arrangements. That's the last thing she remembers. Statistically, the most dangerous day in a woman's life is the day she's leaving. And in this case, that's the last thing she remembers. Then she wakes up from a medically induced coma in the hospital with no memory of what happened in between.
And Brendan, this all happened in 2016, so the case is now closed, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation refuses to reopen it. So why do you think that is, and could this be a case then for the FBI?
Look, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is one of the best investigative agencies in the country. It's literally world-renowned. It is an excellent organization. In this case, though, they botched the investigation, and that's not opinion. That's supported by the facts. They didn't talk to the immediate next-door neighbor for months. They didn't talk to people who heard a gunshot hours earlier. They didn't do sort of that basic investigative technique. They even discovered that Matthew Boynton, the officer, had changed clothes, but then they never asked for his clothes to check for gunshot residue or any of the standard forensic analysis. They just simply failed to do the full investigation up front, and by the time they were sort of guilted into it, it was really too late to do that full investigation over again. And so as a result, what we're left with is simply more questions than answers. Could the FBI come in? That's a good question. Because it's a law enforcement officer, there is a possibility. There's a civil rights angle perhaps, but because this all happened within the state of Georgia, it's unlikely the feds would get involved.
Wow. What an interesting story. We just all want some closure. Well, thank you so much, Brendan. To read more on this case, visit 11alive.com. This story, we want you to know, is also the subject of a new podcast called The Officer's Wife. The first episode is out right now. Brendan, thanks again.
As of 2021, Jessica Boynton has custody of her children, but she still has no idea what really happened on that fateful April night in 2016. And as far as the GBI is concerned, the case remains closed. I'm Sam Shocker. Thank you for watching DBL's True Crime Chronicles.